this thing. I got to hold up the book today. I'm very, very pleased, super excited to have a conversation with Nate Rifkin. So he's the author of The Standing Meditation. It's about excelling in a modern world using ancient practice. Nate, warm welcome to you. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you, Michael. I'm honored to be here.
Yeah, no, my honor, my pleasure. I am excited. I was telling you off air a little bit, super excited for this conversation. I feel like it comes at such a good time for me personally, and I hope by way of that for the audience. I'm really fascinated by so much ancient wisdom that's out there, and I know it gets repackaged in today's world under different brands, but the important thing is there's no need to necessarily reinvent the wheel. There's so much out there that is, you are living proof. We're going to hear your story about how these ancient practices can be so powerful in modern life. And I love, and I really love to study how we don't really show up and optimize and excel in our lives until we take care of some fundamental things. And you've married these two things, and how an ancient practice has helped you sort of get past some very tough things and start to not only survive that, but excel. So I'll kick it off briefly from having read the book. I know you were, let's talk about the funk you were in: suicidal, alcoholic, failing financially, so many other ways. So tell me a little bit more about that, and then let's talk about how you discovered the practice that's really empowered you.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, it's almost like in order to discover all this, I had to crawl through my own personal hell first, which is fine. It was more than worth it. But I mean, I grew up in a very emotionally shut down family. I was a very depressed, angry kid. And as I got older, it just got worse and worse because everyone else seemed to be having so much more fun, making friends, happy, going on dates, growing up. And I felt just more and more miserable and socially awkward. And I went to college, and it was probably one of the worst, most depressing times of my life, because I just felt, I just started hating myself. I just thought I was such a loser because um, I could not get a date to save my life. And I didn't care about my grades. I didn't care about studying, and I wasn't able to make any friends. Um, so this is at UMass Amherst, by the way, which is this giant campus. It's like 18,000 kids on the campus. So I just felt like lost in a sea of people. And I decided to drop out. I dropped out after 3 semesters, and I told no one I was gone. The only person who probably figured out that I disappeared was my roommate, because he probably walked in after the break and saw like half the stuff cleared out. That was the evidence of me disappearing. Um, and but I still had a dream to go into business for myself. And I did. I started studying self-help. I started studying marketing, business. And I really hustled. I really worked hard. And I started an online-based business with my older brother. And he's an expert in yoga. So we were selling yoga DVDs. But this will give you how long ago it was. DVDs back then. So I was setting goals, like financial goals, personal goals, fitness goals. I was visualizing, my success, and I was funding all of the business efforts with my personal credit cards. And we had some hit or miss success, but I started going deeper into debt, which started to get really scary, especially when I was maxing out my credit cards. The bill would come in the mail, and I'd drop it on the floor and then take another letter and drop it on top. It just kind of happened that way, and out of sight, out of mind, which was a terrible financial strategy. It didn't work. And I got more and more frightened because I felt like I just didn't have any ground beneath my feet financially. And I was worried about how I was going to pay my rent every month. And I was I'd moved into a tiny condo in Boulder, Colorado. And I still was that same awkward, lonely guy. Now I was in my early 20s. And I just started getting more depressed and more frustrated because nothing I was doing was working. I never achieved a single goal I set. All the stuff I visualized was not coming true. Um, and I started to feel so jaded and bitter about it, and just had these looping, just self-hating thoughts. I mean, sometimes I'd end up curled in the fetal position on the floor of my condo. And the only relief I really got was to crawl into bed and sleep. At my worst, I mean, yeah, I thought about killing myself. And I started drinking alcohol every morning to cope. I would pour like a couple of shots of Smirnov's triple distilled vodka into a glass and then top it up, not top it off, but I'd pour an equal amount of like an energy drink. That was my breakfast. And that, I mean, it got me through the day. And I just dropped all the self-help I was doing because something was missing and none of it worked. So that was like me at my lowest point. And then fortunately, like, things turned around because I started to like veer away from the typical like mindset stuff, and then started getting to more like Eastern esoteric stuff. That's how things started to turn around for me.
That's really interesting. Sorry to hear you went through that. I know, looking back on it, we could say, well, hey, it was maybe necessary. It was the desperation that
Yeah.
catalyzed the inspiration. It's the second act of the 3-act play, the hero's journey, whatever we want to say. But unfortunately, many people don't make it out of that funk. I mean, I've
No.
heard, speaking of suicide, veteran suicide is a real big problem these days. And I've heard veterans describe this as, well, I don't know that I would have described myself as suicidal. It's just that the only time I found peace was when I was asleep, and I just sort of wished I could sleep forever.
Yeah.
Right. And so again, yeah, some people don't make it out the other side, or some people, too many people, are still in that funk right now. So excited to hear more about where your inspiration came from and how you found the tools that were more effective for you from this sort of Eastern philosophy than what you'd been doing in a Western mindset, self-help sort of modality.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had a mentor at the time in the business realm. And it was someone like, I was one of his students. He had a bunch of students, and he was also really into self-help, but he was also into a spiritual tradition called Taoism, which I didn't really know anything about. But he started teaching exercises and meditations from Taoism. And it's really interesting because, and this is also why I'm really happy to be talking with you right now, is because I had like dabbled in meditation before. Of course, I'd heard it. We've all heard of it. And I think most people have heard of it the same way I have. It's like you hear about, you read online where it's just like, oh, meditation is so simple. You just sit quietly and see your thoughts come and go and stay relaxed, and it'll help you be centered and focused. I'm like, that's wonderful. Okay, great. It didn't really get me excited. And I tried it a little bit, and I felt a little hazy, but I'm just like, what, I don't know. Is this good? Is it bad? I don't even know. Like, I'm similar to you. I'm a guy that's like, no, look, give me the best information. I want to see the results, and I really want to see major results too. So when I started learning about Taoist meditation, I started hearing about how it was practiced by like martial artists for thousands of years, and they'd like meditate in caves or on mountaintops, and it would increase their sensory perception and their fighting ability. And then, some would attain enlightenment. I'm like, okay, this is cool. I don't know if it's legit or not, but it sounds pretty cool. And I think that's really important because if someone's stuck in a really bad place, there needs to be a major inspiration to get them, out of their rut. And it just happened that this inspired me, and it inspired me enough to start practicing every day. Now, it's what I learned was a meditation that's actually done in the standing position, and it's done with your knees. I could talk about it more later, but it's done with your knees unlocked, so it actually can be kind of physically challenging. So I started with 60 seconds a day. And I was still drinking at the time, by the way. So I would get up, shower, brush my teeth. I would do 60 seconds of this meditation, and then I'd go drink. And then I promised myself I will add 5 seconds a day so my body will adapt. It's like the old just principle of gradual overload. Um, so I'd add 5 seconds, and then as I got more confident, my body adapted. I'd add 10 seconds and a little bit more. And I noticed something interesting. I started to get like a buzz, like a cool, pleasant feeling in my body. And as the days went on, the buzz started catching up in terms of how good it felt to the buzz I'd get from alcohol. And then one day, I was feeling so good from meditating when I walked over to my kitchen, mixed the drink and drank it. I didn't feel any better. I just felt more drunk when I drank it. I'm like, wait a minute, this is interesting. So what's gonna keep happening if this trend continues? Well, within 2 days, um, I actually felt so good from meditating that when I took a drink of alcohol, I felt a little bit worse. So I actually decided to stop drinking. I stopped drinking the vodka in the morning. I didn't. It's not like I like decided to cut alcohol out of my life or anything like that. And this is just personally what happened to me. But I never touched that bottle again until I drained it down the drain when I moved out of my condo. So people started to like notice a difference in me too. Like I'd run into a friend and he'd be like, "Wow, Nate, you're looking more confident." And that's when I realized, okay, feedback. This isn't just in my head. Something's going on. And then one night, I remember doing this meditation, and I was up to like 8 minutes at the time. And I felt like my body was just glowing like the sun. And it felt so good that I remember sitting down on my futon and saying to myself, I'm going to dedicate my life to this, just because this has been one of the best things that, if not the best thing that happened in my life. And that was about 12 years ago. And since then, I've just run crazy experiments for years. I did an hour a day. And now my mission is to tell other people about this because it can transform lives.
Yeah, it's super exciting to learn about. When I read the book and I discovered you and your journey and the standing meditation. So the book actually prescribes how to perform the standing meditation, and so I did it for we did it for 5 minutes.
Cool.
Felt great. It took the first few minutes of kind of like going back to Nate's notes and adjusting the posture and trying to get it, as right as possible. But I could see what you're saying in terms of, I feel like societally, America or Western society, we went from, maybe meditation is largely, I don't know if it's taboo, but yeah, that doesn't work, or it's not science, or it's not Western medicine. Maybe we moved from that to people are downloading the Headspace app,
Yeah.
right? And okay, great. It can help with targeted anxiety, flights, sports performance, public speaking, or sleep, just generally dealing with stress and anxiety of life, and learning to sit quietly and do some breathing and do a guided concentration practice or visualization. It's a great step forward.
Yeah.
I don't know that that is the inspiration to pull somebody out of a rut, and I don't know if people realize that's a step, but we can continue stepping much further than that. So, in terms of what you're doing, I just want to jump to a random question that came up for me as you
Sure.
were describing that. When you started feeling that buzz, like you called it, does it have a color for you?
Everyone's different. It's an interesting question. Because some people, what's going on in their body will result in visual phenomena.
Hmm.
And visual as in like it's registering visually in their brains. So at times, yes, because when I felt like my body was glowing in my mind's eye, I was also seeing like as if I were a sun, a very bright,
Hmm.
you could call it a golden white light. Um, so yeah, it did result in that, and sometimes it does. And it's interesting. And you didn't ask about this, but I'll add, it can also come about as scents,
Hmm.
like smells. Um, in fact, and both putrid and good, because oftentimes you'll one of my teachers describes as like he always smells it as cookies, and it's like these fresh baked cookies, and it's sort of like your body's interpretation through the vehicle of the five senses, which is what we're used to processing information with, as like, oh, this is good, this is going really well, I made a great breakthrough. Same thing with a bad scent or even a bad visual, by the way, because it means it can mean you're working through something like old emotional trauma. So that's the long answer. The short answer is yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm asking that for a few reasons. It seems like when I have run across people who have been in similar practices for quite some time, have a level of experience, even teachers, instructors, gurus, there's a hesitancy to answer some questions like that are specific. And I think maybe it's because they're individualized in the sense that everybody's going to have their own experience. And so prescribing an answer may, I don't know, take away from somebody's own experience in the journey.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, and that's why I added on. It can appear as different senses, and it could be intermittent. It's totally random, and everyone's individual. And not to not to cause too much controversy and stuff. I don't want to badmouth anyone, but oftentimes the reason a big guru will avoid that question is they might just not know the answer and might not have the experience, and they'd rather appear mysterious. What's that? It's like that. I think it's Abraham Lincoln. I might be wrong, but the quote was like, it's better to be quiet rather than remove all doubt of your ignorance or something like that.
That's a good one.
Yeah, and I butchered it a little bit, but it's on Google. So yeah.
I had the chance to study with a kung fu master a little bit last year.
Cool.
And this guy's been a master and a practitioner of that art for 50 plus years, dating back to Bruce Lee's school in Hong Kong. And he did things that I saw, and my modern brain can't explain. And in asking him to, he was happy to share and teach and demonstrate, but he couldn't necessarily explain, and he couldn't prescribe. It was more of, you had to just sort of practice to get there. And in the similar, I think it might have been the same weekend of practice, I got to a place in some of my breath work where I was starting to perceive a bright whitish light, or maybe feeling or energy. And I asked another one of the instructors a question of, hey, what might this be? And there wasn't really a sort of direct answer, or, it was almost sort of a knowing chuckle. And I think just recently, from what I was reading, I believe it was, I'm looking at another screen here, I think it was some stuff I was reading about Reiki,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that was describing that white light potentially as energy, as chi.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I love what you said about the master you trained with, because that makes a lot of sense, because oftentimes, yeah, they can help you train it, but describing could be a little tricky, because I like to compare it to, like, say, someone who lift weights, and you see someone bench press 100 pounds, and then you see someone who's been doing it for a long time bench press 400. If you're going to ask them about it, eventually it's going to be like, look, I don't know, come back in 15 years of bench pressing, and then we could have a conversation. It's like, I could. So yeah, and I think a lot of it is similar, like with the person you trained with.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So why standing, right? So there's different forms of meditation, and I think there are different maybe poses from an energetic flow perspective. So why standing?
That's a great question. It comes down. Here's how I like to describe it. I'm sure you've heard of acupuncture, or maybe even gotten a treatment. So one of the foundational pillars of Taoism is Chinese energetic medicine, and all of acupuncture, Chinese herbalism, actually comes from Taoism. So when an acupuncturist, like, places, you lie on a table and they stick those needles all over your body, they're sticking those needles into meridians in your body, which are channels for the energy that flow throughout your body. Now, when I first heard this, I thought, well, that's cute. That's kind of quaint. I don't know. That sounds like something people, when they're trying to grasp at medicine before we had microscopes and stuff like that. But as it turns out, there is some preliminary science showing that we do have these channels of energy that flow through our fascia tissue, which was previously thought to just be this tissue that held our organs in place. And it's piezoelectric energy. And this piezoelectric energy may have to do with how our stem cells grow and proliferate. So, and if you go beyond that, it goes over my head. But it's pretty cool, because when I read stuff like that and I connect it to Taoism and these meditative practices, I see how they start to mesh together. And I say all that because standing, what you're doing is, it's like giving yourself an acupuncture treatment. When you stand in a certain way, you're opening up those channels and allowing energy to flow through them more freely, and more powerfully. Now, this can happen even sitting, if you use your intention, but standing is just a great way to do it. It's very efficient and very powerful. And I also think it's a really cool way to get into meditation, because it provided me with that physical challenge to really, like, make me work for it. And it also like develops your physical health tremendously. So that's why I love staying. And by the way, Tai Chi and a lot of like, not all kinds, but a lot of Kung Fu, the way that they move is actually derived from the simple standing postures, because the principles of the standing posture are embedded in those martial arts. So it's like, it's just super cool to discover all this.
Yeah, and that's where I go back to sort of this ancient wisdom stuff. Is you start connecting dots for yourself as you start to learn about it. In fact, I just had a conversation a bit earlier with a buddy who is he's a fairly devout Catholic. He goes to church almost every morning, or maybe every morning that he works. That's sort of his pre-work meditation. So we were talking about how that can be a meditation, and I was reflecting on how so many of these organized religious practices, when you start to look at it, it's like, wait a minute, they're not just sitting there singing from a hymnal. They're actually in a meditative practice. They're probably in a breath practice. Some of these breath practices involve things like humming that have physical benefits. In
Yeah.
a modern, it looks like a modern religious spiritual practice, and it is, but it's embedded with so much ancient wisdom and benefit that we may not realize.
Oh yeah, yeah, you're right on. Oh, I love it. Yeah, it's so cool to discover this, and not only that, but the power of your words, because a lot of these traditions, and they and all from thousands of years ago, the one of the first principles of all of them, we're talking around the globe, is the power of your words and the power of congregating together with a shared purpose, like which could be at a church. So yeah, it's so cool you brought that up. Right on. And I'm learning a lot about this stuff because I started with Taoism, and then I'm starting to learn about other spiritual traditions, and they're all kind of doing the same thing. The way my teachers described it is like, we all start on different parts of the mountain, but our trails are different, but we're all, as we get closer to the peak, we all get closer together, you know?
I like that.
Yeah.
So if we tie that, talking about the importance of words, that's one way that we sort of organize and express our thoughts, but thoughts, words, beliefs become actions. So important the way we talk to ourselves and each other. How, and that to me, that sort of brings me back to where you started with maybe modern self-help and NLP and other forms of that mindset side of things. So have you come full circle where now that you have the power of the standing and meditative practices, are you able to incorporate some of the, I don't know, the mindset side of things as well?
Yeah, I am, because I had a feeling, over a decade ago, that I was missing something.
Mm.
And I grew really bitter and jaded about developing myself. But once I started combining everything together, where I was really I was into a foundational meditative practice. The way I like to describe it is, all the other stuff I tried, when I tried it again, it started to work more, because a different me was doing the work. So because when someone is really in a bad spot, their thoughts are chaotic, maybe self-hating, and they don't really have any kind of meditative practice, their life is going to be pretty chaotic, and it's going to be hard to see the cause and effect. And that's where I was, because I'm like, well, I tried thinking positive, and I really did, and my life didn't get any better. I didn't see any like ripple effects of things coming back to me. I thought it was just all luck and circumstance, and everything else is BS. But and I was half correct, because when you're first getting started, your life is going to be very chaotic, and it's going to be very difficult to have super quick, like overnight results. But as you work on yourself, I'm sure you've noticed this, you do start to see the patterns in life, and how, oh, the words I speak here really are going to have this tremendous effect on another part of my life, or how I think about this is going to have a tremendous effect on the results of my actions. So yeah, for me personally, I had to start with the meditation. Now, someone else might start somewhere else, and then maybe meditation will be a good add-on later. But that was definitely my experience.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, 100%. It's almost, go back to the old movie trilogy, The Matrix. You start to see the
Yeah.
Matrix. You see how it's all sort of connected and working. And I'm a big believer that you can be either in this sort of virtuous upward spiral, or it's easy to get into a downward spiral where maybe even when you're in that funk, maybe you have a win here or there, but you can end up just being self-destructive, and you'll find some way to screw it up. So before we talk a little bit more about what life can look like on the other side of that, when you
Yeah.
are, humming along and it's that virtuous cycle, I want to ask a little bit more about the energetic side of things. Really personally interested in this. So, I come from an engineering and econ background in school, so it was definitely very quantitative, scientific. And so now, I find it funny to sort of laugh at myself that I could believe in lots of forms of energy that we can't see,
Hmm.
right? Our Wi-Fi, our radio, our TV, our cell phone, whatever it might be that we know works. We know about spectrums of light and other forms of energy, but find it so hard to believe in energies within our body, in and around our body, but we know it's real, right? And we
Yeah.
know that we don't know everything. So that being said, I'm now of the absolute belief that we're energetic beings, right? We know our brain runs on electricity. We know
Hmm.
there's other
Hmm.
forms of sort of energy in our bodies. And you talk a little bit about how energy can get blocked.
Yeah.
I mean, we know sometimes you don't get a cell signal. I got no bars,
Yeah.
right? And
Right.
so
Right.
I've definitely come to believe that we can have these energetic blockages in our body, in our being, whether that's through trauma or other things that cause it. So acupuncture is one approach to try to treat that. What is that treatable through your practice, through meditation? How, so let's just be specific about healing and traumas, to the point, to the extent that past traumas from our lives are energetic blockages in our self. How do we clear those?
That's a great question, and it's interesting because when I went from having those self-hating thoughts to getting my inner life together, it was because I was finally dealing with those old traumas, and I didn't even realize at the time, but that's what was happening with a meditative practice. So what goes on is that when we're young, I mean, when we come into this world, we are going to be get hit with trauma. It's just going to happen. It could be something as innocuous as like a parent yelling at us not to touch a hot stove, or it could be from abusive parents, or just a really hurtful environment. So what goes on is that, when we're young, you often we're not able to fully process this trauma, and we attach a story to it. um, and what happens is it can get, the shock of the trauma can get embedded in our tissues somehow. um, and by the way, this can be seen very tangibly, and felt very tangibly, because some people walk through their lives, I know I did, with their shoulders shrugged up, because that's a very defensive posture. And I used to have much more tight traps and shoulders. Not only my shoulders are up, but my elbows were out in a defensive posture, like I was trying to block an assault that wasn't even there. um, so it can manifest in our muscular tissues in that respect. And it can also get stuck and lodged in those meridians that run throughout our body and run through our organs. So what happens is, and I'll use myself as an example. I could go through all the positive thinking self-help as I could possibly get my hands on, but it didn't address any of those old traumas. In fact, some of the self-help stuff I learned literally said, don't worry about your past and your old traumas. You can just, set a goal and move forward, and things will take care of themselves. If that works for someone, that's great. I don't want to interfere with that. But it did not work for me, because all the old traumas are still going to lead to self-sabotage, or ways that limit my perception and shut down my perception. Like I might, and if I were to start a business, it would shut down my perception, where a healthy partner that wants to help me thrive, I might literally not see, whereas I somehow get drawn to someone that's going to steal my money or something like that. I can tell you from experience, that's not theory. So, so the answer is to remove those traumas. So They started because we weren't able to process them in a healthy way, so they got lodged in our tissues. The answer is to revisit them, to actually dislodge them from our tissues and run through the emotional shock. So this is why when we do a meditative practice, and I bet a lot of people have gone through this without realizing what was happening. We'll sit quietly, and maybe we'll be or sitting or standing, but we're breathing deeply, we're engaging in meditative practice, and old memories will pop up. And it's just like we think, oh yeah, darn it, I'm not meditating correctly. All this old memories popping up, and now it could be an upsetting memory. Or we could have an emotion pop up that doesn't have any kind of memory attached to it, but all of a sudden we get angry, we get irritated, or we get really anxious about something. What's going on is when the energy is now running through our body more freely, it's sort of like we're a self-cleaning oven. Stuff is going to come up. And now, as an adult, we have the opportunity to just sit and calmly feel the emotion. And that's when it'll finally disperse. And that's when the trauma can start to get resolved. Because often, depending on the strength of the trauma, there's deeper and deeper layers, and our body's pretty good about dealing with them slowly so that we can manageably deal with it. But that's all that's going on at a level that's beneath our conscious attention. We can feel the results, but it goes on as a result of our practice. It's similar to lifting weights. Our focus is on lifting the heavy weight. The damage to our tissues that results in our body repairing them a little bit stronger will happen beneath our conscious attention. And it's the same way of processing emotional trauma.
That's a good analogy. So I think I took two things from that. So let me play this back and see if you would agree, or did I hear you right? So I'll just, again, use myself as an example and sort of the healing journey. So, and you mentioned emotions, which is just spot on. So had a therapist tell me, hey, look, you're emotionally constipated. That's what he likes to call it. So he says, you got traumas. We all got traumas, right? We all got traumas and dramas. As you said, we don't process them as a child. Ultimately, these are survival mechanisms. You stow them away, you compartmentalize them, and you survive. But then if you don't process them, it's very hard to thrive as an adult. So now it's time to process them, right? So how do you get emotionally unstuck or unconstipated or energetically unstuck? And so I think two things I took away from what you said is, one, we have to find a practice like this, like a meditative practice, like a standing meditation. And the essence of practice is repetition. So there's going to be repetition of this. It's not a conscious level of energetic emotional clearing. It's a practice that is going to help us subconsciously process through those things. And then you also mentioned them coming up. And so as I've started to work through practices with the intention of that emotional clearing, I initially started to have some of those very strong emotions come up again, some that were familiar or some that you hadn't thought of in a long time, or memories, as you're saying. And my first reaction was that same survival mechanism, to want to jam them back down and just refocus on something else, distract, deny. But when I continued to practice with an openness to, well, just feel into it a little bit and a little bit more, and little by little, I believe that was sort of my beginning of processing and releasing. Does all that fit or sound right from what you're describing?
Yeah, that fits perfectly. And actually, I really love what you said right there at the end about feeling it. Because that switches your brain from the analytical to sensory perception. Because once you truly dive into feeling what it was like, that is you being able to process it, and you don't have to analyze it. If you make a cool connection, that's great, but that's the cool part. We don't have to analyze it. We just sit with it and feel it come up, and feeling it go. So yeah. And I like the emotionally constipated part, but I mean, but yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. It's a survival mechanism. A great metaphor my teachers like to say is that it's like a triathlon. Now, if you're swimming, and let's say it's a triathlon that allows you to wear flippers, if you wear flippers in the water, I mean, you're going to coast much quicker. it's a much more efficient way to move through the water. So the flippers are very helpful. Now, when you crawl out of the water and you say you're going to hop on a bike, the flippers are not going to serve you. Now it's easy, and try biking with a pair of flippers. So you have to remove them, discard them. Now with that metaphor, it's easy to see it, but our body doesn't realize that it's still clinging to something that at a younger time was very, very useful, but it's not useful now.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And it does take work,
Yeah.
i.e. a practice like this.
Yeah.
So then, and I think, you answered this in a way, but let's touch on it again, because I think it's so important, and I want to get your take on it super clearly. Now you've been through the process you've been through, and we talked a little bit about how I love the sort of visual you gave me of closing down or narrowing your vision, maybe
Yeah.
when you're in a negative and self-inflicted sort of behavior and thought pattern, versus the other of broadening perspective and openness. So maybe the simple question is why and how. So when we get into a practice like this and we're living in a healthier way, energetically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually,
Mhm.
why, how does that show up in our lives as success in business and relationships, and how people perceive you and notice you?
That's a great question. Let's there's a lot to unpack here, so I'll say it this way. The way it'll show up with other people is that once we start processing a lot of our own stuff on a very tangible level, our body language will start to change in a positive way. And I really, really love this part of the process, because I was that guy a decade ago where I'm just like, I want to learn the body language secrets. I'll make people like me and attracted to me. Now, some people that might work. For me, it just added another layer of awkwardness, because now is this guy trying to throw my shoulders back to alpha male or whatever. Didn't work too well. But when you start processing these old traumas, your muscles will start to relax, and you will naturally take on a confident and open demeanor, and body language, and because it's just happening automatically, you're not going to self-sabotage by trying too hard or being awkward about it. Other people will pick up on the difference, even if they have no idea what you're doing. They'll just think, oh, I just like this guy. I like being around this guy. And the cool part is, people who are kind of not in such a great space, they'll feel a dissonance. It's like a lack of rapport with you. So that's how it'll show up with other people. Now, in terms of business, it's all going to be a ripple effect. I'd love to be able to give you here's the meditation that will double your sales. As soon as I find that one, I will let you know about it. But what I have found is that it in an indirect way, because you're thinking more clearly, you're not wasting mental energy on self-doubt and I should say, like, really pathological self-doubt. Self-hate is a better word for it, because you can doubt something and that could be very healthy. But it's pathological self-hate, because you're not wasting energy on this. You're able to devote more of your mental energy to analyzing the market, to producing a better product for your customers, to being able to get just better work done in less time, and being able to, again, because you're getting along with people better, you're able to function better within a team and be a better leader. And all of this is not something you're pushing yourself to do necessarily. It's because you've worked through the old trauma that was causing self-sabotage. So indirectly, it'll lead to success in business. Because I don't know about you, but in my life, looking back on the past 15 years, when I look at my biggest business failures, it was always where I tripped myself up. And I look back 15 years later and I'm thinking, I just didn't see it. I just didn't see how that business partner was a toxic person. I just didn't get it. Or I was screwing up in these networking situations and I just didn't get it. There wasn't any kind of an app or something really simple, or that I could put in place to fix that. So what I like to say is that a meditative practice like this will help you in all areas of life, like business and your relationships, because it'll help resolve all the unknowns that would trip you up. So oftentimes the biggest benefits will be the ones that you don't even know about, because the bad stuff never happens to you.
Hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting way to think about it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can totally relate. I completely agree that when we're so both ways, both directions. So when you start to make these kind of changes, people, they notice, whether they know why they notice or not. Like, hey Nate, something's different about you. What have you been doing?
Yeah.
And likewise, when you're kind of in that funk, I think of it in terms of, at least from my own experience, that too many decisions were sort of forced and probably rationalized
Yeah.
at great expense, and probably because there was something inside telling me something different that I was ignoring, not tuning into, not trusting. So if I had to use some words, I might pick like awareness and alignment and clarity, things that can come from a practice like this, to just tune in more to some over, whether it's intuition, overall awareness, just kind of tuning into a decision process, alignment that feels right, whether it's with a business partner, whether it's with a decision, whether it's with a direction you might have a choice between.
Yeah.
That's how it showed up for me.
Oh yeah, that I completely agree. Because you made me remember in my life, what were the times when I was just blindsided? It was when my gut feeling was overshadowed by my greed,
Yeah.
or my desperation to like get away from something, or desperation to achieve something. So, I don't the only hack I ever found to get rid of that is to resolve the root cause of the desperation and the greed, which is usually some old wounding from when I was a child. So yeah.
Yeah, which goes back to the same clearing of traumas. Well, I want to respect your time, so I want to get into sort of what's next. But before we do, I got one more question on just what this looks like for you. Some depth into this practice, and you sort of mentioned folks that may not be on the same wavelength. Maybe the just rapport doesn't feel like it's there, and so maybe it just doesn't have to get dealt with. But if I flip that around a little bit, does, or you said you're devoting your life to it, right? So it sort
Mhm.
of answers half this question of, how does it reflect in showing back up in service to others? Obviously it does in your life. What does it look like for you when you have somebody, somebody, family, in business, whatever it might be, and like from your journey and where you are right now, and you see them and you're like, I want to share this wealth with you, and maybe they're not there yet, they're not in the right place, it's not the right time.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's a great question, because this comes up all the time. So I'll answer it like in two different ways. First is that the ancient Taoists were really, really good about how they figured this out, because they realized when you work on your own stuff, you are being of service to the world simply by how you show up in it. And they had a phrase for it, which was living in, the phrase was the marketplace. So we all have this image of like ancient, like spiritual, like traditions where they would have like a monastery and they would work on themselves and meditate. But and Taoists had monasteries, or whatever terminology that they would use. But the real key was that eventually they would return to the marketplace, which is the word for just towns, their everyday life, and they would just interact with people and live very regular lives, because they would take that same meditative state to the marketplace. It would have the ripple effects would occur with other people, and
Hmm.
they would have tangible ways where they would serve, where they would help others, but even just their presence would help out. um so that is a big key into like giving back. And naturally, as you work on yourself, you'll have the like this the energy will spill over, and you'll have the capacity to be able to help others, because when we're when we're in a tough spot, we're not in a position to really help others that effectively. So, and now as far as like when you see someone close to you, this is where it gets real thorny, because I mean, family, oh, family could be the trickiest. And it's not the most fun answer, but really over and over again, we just have to face, it's been proven to us, we have to face the facts that um the people who are closest to us are probably the ones who are going to listen to us the least. We all need kind of that cool guru on the mountain to inspire us. And Nate ain't the cool guru on the mountain to Nate's friend. Nate's like the dude who, bounced a beer can on his head last night or something like that. Um, so that's my long-winded way of saying the best you can do is you can live your own life as an example. And if they ask questions, that's when you can start to have a cool conversation. And otherwise, like, maybe you can ask a question yourself to see if there's any interest. But if there's not, there's really nothing you can do other than just, pray for them and hope that they find their answer in their own way. In fact, in my studies now, in my training, our teachers will always say, refer out. If you have a family asks us something, refer them out. Even if you can answer it, you just refer to your buddy, and hey, your buddy can refer their family to you.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Literally too close to home. And we all do have to find our own way and find the right context and the right energy. My wife and I have been on, I think she's way ahead of me, but we're on pretty parallel paths. She's done it through a very sort of feminine energy and school of teaching and learning. And it wasn't something that resonated to attract me to it. And then I was attracted to sort of another, maybe more, a little bit seemingly more modern, a lot of Eastern and ancient wisdom packaged in here as I dug in, but a more masculine sort of energy to the coaches I was working with. And then we sat down and she goes, "Hey, like, what have you been working on?" It's like,
That's
holy cow,
cool.
this is all the same stuff, right? We're
Yeah,
just,
that's
as you
super
said,
cool.
we're coming up the mountain from different paths.
Yeah, and if you're fortunate enough to have friends who are in a similar spot where they're doing their own learning, it's great to have that. If you have that, that's wonderful, because you could share, you can compare notes, and we call that having friends of the Tao, in Taoism. And I think for a spouse, it's actually essential. And it can get tricky when you meet couples where they're not exactly on parallel paths together, because you can't really say anything. But I think it's absolutely essential, because your spouse can be make or break in your life.
Oh yeah, 100%. I had a coach talk about this, and he may have gotten this from another book, but I think it's a really good way to think about maybe our obligation in some of this, especially with family. Is there's a science that if you have an IQ gap that's too big between two people, they're going to have a hard time relating. Equally, in this type of thing, whether we call it an EQ gap or however we sort of think of quantifying this, if that gap widens too much, it's just going to be very hard to relate. And so as we're evolving and developing ourselves, particularly with family and a spouse, somebody that's that close and important to us, it's our responsibility to try to move along together, to try to bring them along with us, or vice versa, so that gap doesn't get too wide. And can't force it. Timing's got to be right. the path and the school and the energy and all that, but we want to be aware of sort of evolving and growing together.
Oh yeah, and I'm really glad you said that, because I don't want to say I misspoke, but or maybe I did, but yeah, big difference between family as in relatives and your core family, like the family you choose as your spouse and your children. So yeah, that is a totally different story. Yeah, you do all want to grow together. So yeah, I forgot to make that differentiation there.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
appreciate that as well. Well, so in terms of what you're up to in your service and making this your life's mission, I get this in the camera here for anybody who's on YouTube, right? The Standing Meditation by Nate Rifkin, excel in the modern world and using an ancient practice. What's next? So that's what I sort of asked earlier. How are you bringing this out to people? I know the book is very prescriptive about the practice, so that's a great place for people to start. And I'll put links up in the show notes for this episode to your book on Amazon, other places it's sold. What else? Are you also a guru, a coach? Do you interact with people in other ways, or is it primarily through the book?
Well, thank you. I'm just a guy who went through his own personal hell and discovered this really cool stuff. I mean, in all seriousness, yeah, I've got the book. It's been out for a little bit, and I'm really, really excited and humbled by how that's gone. And also, right now, I'm fulfilling a big part of my dream of dedicating my life to this, because I'm currently training to become a Taoist priest, and it's just it's really wonderful because I get to learn a lot more about the how of how these practices work so well, and like you said, prescriptive, like being able to say, hey, if you've got this issue, check this out, this might really help. And I get to take all this knowledge, which is really esoteric, and translate it so that's really, really helpful and effective. And the book was, the standing meditation was, sort of like step one for that.
Is there another step coming we should look forward to?
Um, Maybe we'll see. If there is, it would probably be something that I talk about with folks who've read the standing meditation, so that we can start building, like because that book really sets the foundation for a skyscraper. So I'd work with people on top of that. But for now, I'm a crazy writer, so I'm holed up and just writing more stuff. And as soon as something's published, I'm sure you'll hear about it. You won't be able to shut me up.
Fantastic. No, and when I say prescriptive, you got some great illustrations in there, some sketches on body posture for the standing meditation. Do you have anything online on a website or YouTube around that posture and the practice?
Well, actually, yeah, in the book, I have a URL where people can see like a video of me demonstrating it.
Okay, perfect.
So yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thought I remember that, but I wasn't wasn't quite sure. I didn't want to make a promise that wasn't there. So I'll get that link up for people as well. And then just maybe lastly, we talked about the benefits. We talked about how you found it and how much of a powerful change it's been in your life. For people that get the book and want to give it a try, what is the prescription? You started with a minute. What's the ideal sort of minimum dose?
Oh yeah. And by the way, this is actually really wonderful for more than that meditative practice. I don't want to say anyone, but I would venture to say any meditative practice. 60 seconds a day, and what I did is I added 5 seconds. And here's why. When we're building a new habit, it's not about putting in hours per day. It's about making it a part of our day, which then makes it a part of our identity. And I had the most success finding a time of my day to sandwich it in between two other tasks. And so when I say time of the day, it wasn't necessarily like 8:35 a.m. It was like, for me, it was after I brushed my teeth, and I mean, it was before I drank alcohol, which is kind of bizarre, but that's what I did. That solidified the habit.
Hmm.
And then from there, once it became part of my identity, then it was almost like the training wheels had come off. So I think it works very similar for anyone else when installing a new habit. So yeah, 60 seconds, add 5 seconds a day. And when you start feeling more confident, you start enjoying yourself, you start resonating with the practice, you can start adding more time. And I had a lot of success at like 25 minutes a day. It seems like a lot, but um, you'll get so much out of it that it'll seem like very little. It'll seem like a great investment.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I mean, just the starting to build a new practice, a minute a day, a great habit, and then just building consistency and then building some duration to that over time. I think people probably find their own sweet spot, and then you can, at least from my experience, you can play around with different things.
Yeah.
I've done a breathing meditation that I like to do on a daily basis for 15 or 20 minutes. I've gone and, hey, I want to pick a crucible for this weekend, sit and do the same exercise for 2 hours straight. Right. So you
Cool.
kind of play around that way. And
Yeah.
at least for me, all these things, they seem easy to start, and then somewhere in there's like this little inflection point where you have some resistance,
Oh yeah,
and then
your
at some
body
point
starts freaking out. Yeah.
yeah, your mind wants to freak out and run
Yeah.
away, and then it sort of becomes timeless, and all of a sudden you're done, the timer goes off.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And once, if you can just, use your willpower to get over that hump, you're home free.
Fantastic. Well, Nate, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and talk about this. I was excited when I got your book and then was able to dig in, and I just had so many questions for you. I appreciate you taking the time to field my questions and my curiosity and help me apply this to my life. And thank you for having the courage to share your journey and where you're at.
Well, thank you, Michael. I was honored to be here.
Yeah. Well, thanks. We'll see you again when the next book comes out, I hope, or hear more about the Taoist priest journey.
Absolutely. I'd love to.
Cool. Thanks so much, Nate.